PACOM commander we have here, and we're always very, very glad to hear from you. John Aquilino graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy. He has served in numerous fighter squadrons, including the famous Red Rippers, and has commanded across the U.S. military, including most recently as the 36th commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. So clearly has deep, deep knowledge for us in the topic we were just talking about. And to interview Commander Aquilino, we have David Ignatius, an old friend and member of the Aspen Strategy Group, a columnist at the Washington Post, winner of many, many journalism awards, including, of course, the George Polk Award, and one of the most knowledgeable journalists on this area of the world. So David and Commander Aquilino, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
So my thanks to Anja. I think Admiral Aquilino and I both wish that we were in Aspen to be having this conversation.
Next year.
We'll hope for next year. Admiral, it's great to have you with us virtually. Let me begin with the issue that's on your mind the most, and I think these days on everyone's minds, which is China. Your predecessor as a combatant commander, Admiral Davidson, made some headlines back in March when he told the Senate Armed Services Committee that for China, and I'm quoting here, Taiwan is clearly one of their ambitions, and I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, during the next 6 years. So I want to lead off by asking you whether you have the same timetable, and also as you settle into the job after your first 3 months, what your own thoughts are about the China problem that you confront.
Well, David, good morning. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you and my conversation. And that is a headline that Admiral Davidson stated that has certainly been on everyone's mind. Let me start by laying a little of the groundwork. First of all, the Indo-Pacific, as identified by the Secretary, is the most consequential theater with our greatest security challenge. Additionally, as you know, 4 or 5 of the identified national defense strategy threats reside in this theater. And as we always do, we always want to talk about China immediately. And what I would like to highlight is some words that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said the other day at Sea Air Space. He categorized this. He said, China is coming at us rapidly. That includes economically, diplomatically, and militarily. And he said the challenge is putting the international order under tremendous stress. So I will tell you, I do not have a crystal ball in that. When I was confirmed, what I highlighted is that I have a sense of urgency in order to execute the integrated deterrence that the Secretary of Defense has tasked us with. We are here to continue to operate to ensure peace and prosperity through the region. And we have to be in a position to ensure that the status quo remains as it applies to Taiwan. And the U.S. One China policy and our engagements are dictated by the Taiwan Relations Act. And we support peaceful and approved actions that avoid anything other than peaceful resolution to those questions for the nations across both sides of the strait. So our engagements with Taiwan are to ensure that they are able to defend themselves in accordance with, as I said, the Taiwan Relations Act, the 6 assurances and the 3 communiques. That policy is clear, and that's why we're here.
So, Admiral, if I could just continue with the question of Taiwan, which is certainly on everyone's minds. Given what has occurred in Hong Kong over the last year, some have speculated, and this speculation, I think, increased after the Anchorage meeting between senior U.S. officials and Chinese officials, that Taiwan may be a real priority for President Xi Jinping. We see an increase in rhetoric from Beijing. Certainly, Chinese military activity and power is being demonstrated. I'm going to ask how concerned you are that this is a near-term threat and the possibility that China's timetable for some resolution of the Taiwan issue from their standpoint may be being stepped up so that it's a more immediate problem than we might have thought a few years ago.
Thanks, David. So I think what I would say is we certainly view with concern many of the actions that we've seen from Beijing. They are clearly, as has been stated by President Xi, a desire to achieve the capabilities that he believes his nation needs militarily by 2027. Those are his words. But I think what I view with most concern are certainly not the words, but the actions that we've seen. Taiwan is a critical part of President Xi's legacy, and he has voiced that as well. But when I say concerned about actions, you've highlighted one of them, which is the actions that occurred in Hong Kong. Those actions were completely disconnected from the words from Beijing to adhere to the agreement that was in place. We see similar actions if you were to look at the border of India. We view that with concern. If you look at the actions associated with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and the violations of what we believe the dignity and respect and human rights, we view those actions with concern. We view with concern the unlawful claim to the entire South China Sea, directly and negatively impacting all of the countries in the region, from their livelihood, whether it be with fishing or access to natural resources. Those are the things that lead me to believe that our execution of integrated deterrence has to occur now and with a sense of urgency.
So that's a powerful list of concerns, Admiral, and I want to ask you about our ability to project power as China becomes more powerful and assertive. It's often said casually that the days when the United States could sail an aircraft carrier task force through the Taiwan Straits in the event of a crisis are over. I'm curious how you would assess that that issue, and more generally, how you would describe our ability to assist and defend Taiwan in the event of a crisis.
David, let me start just by saying, there is a narrative that we see often in the media that talks about the U.S. and the West in decline. I think what I'd start with is, that narrative is certainly being pushed by our adversaries. What I want to be very clear is we have the world's greatest military on the planet. That military will operate anywhere in accordance with international rules and laws. We will fly, steam, and sail anywhere international law allows. The U.S., the Pacific Fleet just recently sailed through the Taiwan Straits. The Taiwan Straits are, by the 1982 UNCLOS treaty is international waters. There is no reason any nation should not be allowed, nor should any nation be allowed to claim it as their own. So the narrative is not based in fact. The US has the world's largest economy. I don't think that I would categorize the US in decline. I do believe it is a narrative that other nations would like to continue to send, but I do believe it's not based in fact.
You're certainly right in noting the stress by our adversaries on this theme of decline, but I want to cite for you somebody who's a strong advocate of the United States and our military power, and that's Chris Brose, the former staff director of the Senate Armed Services Committee, John McCain's key aide on that committee. In a book that he published 2 years ago called The Kill Chain, he wrote something that has really stuck with me. I'll quote it. Over the past decade, Chris says, in US war games against China, the United States has a nearly perfect record. We've lost almost every single time. He goes on to talk about how our spy and communication satellites in these war games are immediately disabled. Our forward bases in Guam and Japan are inundated by precise missiles. Our aircraft carriers are vulnerable and have to escape attack. Our F-35 fighters can't reach targets because of refueling problems, etc. You know this list. My question for you is, are these analyses of US power in your area of command too pessimistic? If they are, I would be interested in knowing what Chinese capabilities you do worry about. If we're overstating the extent of their power, what should we be focused on?
Well, I think I'd start with, we have to have an understanding of what war games are designed to do for us. Those exercises and events, first of all, are designed to learn. Our intent is to challenge ourselves against the absolute most difficult problem. And David, this is the way it's been for hundreds of years. And it's resulted in the military we have today, as I said, the most powerful military on the planet. So, Chris and I have had some conversations. I think we will continue to do that. And I'll just tell you that data is probably dated now, as we have executed a few most recently. But those games have helped us to identify where we have gaps and seams, how we make requests for capabilities and requirements to ensure that our competitive advantage is maintained, that we're not fighting the last war, that we look at everything in the most difficult manner possible, and for the US military to continue to improve. So I guess I'm less concerned with an understanding of truly what we're trying to get out of those war games. The United States has the most capable, advanced military capabilities on the planet. And I think what I'd highlight is, you've heard my secretary talk about integrated deterrence, and I mentioned it before. That view of integrated deterrence is designed for the entire joint force to be able to operate in a synchronized fashion in all domains, as we integrate cyberspace and space capabilities, as we do it with all forms of US national power, and as we synchronize those with our most critical asset, and that is our allies and partners. So when we pull all those together, let me just say that I have a level of confidence that the US military, Department of Defense, is in a good place.
That's a helpful answer. And just to clarify, I hear you saying that some of the vulnerabilities that Chris Brose was writing about that emerged in these war games, your combatant command has taken specific steps to address and that you're less concerned now than you might have been several years ago because of specific changes that have been made. Am I hearing that right?
I think what I'd say is I'm confident that we still have the finest and strongest military on the earth, and that the U.S. is ready for any contingency should it occur.
Let me turn to an issue that we discussed yesterday that's a key new component of your command, and that's the Quad, the relationship between the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. I'd like to ask for your sense of the importance of the Quad for Indo-PACOM, what plans you have about additional exercises, what you think about interoperability issues, and just generally from a military standpoint as a combatant commander, how important the Quad is to your planning.
But I think it's extremely important, and we have to remember that the Quad is based on nations with common values, David, as is all of our alliances and partnerships across the region. Those countries that have a deep belief in their sovereignty, freedom for all their citizens, an understanding that all nations, big and small, have an equal voice in conflict resolution, the rule of law, and dedication to freedom of the seas, the global commons, and human rights for all of their citizens. So it's critical to know that the Quad is one set of nations with those common values, but there's others, right? So the ASEAN nations, the trilateral relationship we have with Japan and Korea. But to your point, the Quad is extremely important, and I'm really encouraged when we talk about the world's largest democracies coming together with common values to ensure peace and stability in the region. I'm especially encouraged as it applies to our most recent operations together militarily. Exercise Malabar, which is a critical event for India in the last iteration, they very graciously invited not only the United States, but Japan and Australia to participate. And I believe it was a huge success, and it will pave the way for additional and more frequent military operations with the Quad. You also see the importance placed on the Quad by Secretary Austin and this administration. I look forward to much more interaction and the continued expansion and increased efforts through the Quad.
Let me ask a specific question that is coming up increasingly, and that is, given the success of the Quad, there's a growing desire on the part of other countries to be part of it, to join it in a formal way as New Zealand might, or to be in effect partners. From a military standpoint, giving your best military advice, do you think it would be wise to do that, to augment the Quad in those ways, or should we keep it pretty much as is?
David, what I would say is that that'll be a question for the leaders of the nation in the Quad. Again, each with an equal voice, each with their own national views on whether or not that would be beneficial. I think what I would tell you is, since I've taken over, I've challenged my team to think, act, and operate differently in this day and age. And what I think that means as it applies to allies and partners is I am very supportive of additional multilateral events and any area where our partners want to come into the area and be able to operate together, whether it's for a short time, whether it's bilaterally or with multiple nations in a multilateral forum. All those are interesting, and I support all of those actions. But each nation gets to have a voice, and we do everything possible to ensure that both the objectives of every nation are taken into account when we work at planning these operations and exercises. I look forward to next year in a post-COVID, hopefully, world where we can execute the Rim of the Pacific exercise, right? So the largest military maritime exercise in the world. We look forward, India came to the last one that was executed in person, as did all of the other Quad nations, as did most of the ASEAN nations, as did many of the West Coast nations. And I'm also encouraged by the EU nations. I'm encouraged by the United Kingdom operating with Queen Elizabeth in this theater. Our partners from France have been here, partners from Germany. The carrier strike group, Queen Elizabeth, has a Dutch ship in company and a US ship in company, combined with US F-35s on board her deck. I think that's what right looks like in the future. And that is those like-minded nations with common values coming together to ensure the international rules-based order is maintained for prosperity for all nations.
Ask you about a specific issue for you as commander and for the entire region, and that's the South China Sea. Could you describe the nature of your efforts as commander to make sure that freedom of navigation prevails, to make sure that Chinese efforts to project power don't go beyond what's permissible? How are you looking at the South China Sea, and what are some specific things that you and Indo-PACOM are doing to deal with that problem?
I got you now, my bad on the button, sorry. I think it's important, David, to hit the importance of the South China Sea. And when I say that, I mean globally and for all nations, right? We just talked about the EU, we talked about the regional nations. You know, 25% of all global trade flows through the South China Sea. Now, that may sound like just a number, but that's pretty important as we look at a globalized economy and prosperity for all nations. A third of all liquid natural gas flows through the South China Sea. Numerous resources for those bordering nations that they rely on, to include fishing to feed their people. So it's critically important for all nations. As I said just previously, the unlawful claim to the entire South China Sea threatens all of that. So when we talk about the South China Sea, understanding the importance is critical. Now, to reduce those tensions, we spend a lot of time with our allies and partners to ensure that the international rules-based order is maintained and unlawful claims don't go without challenge. The Chinese just recently unilaterally renamed 80 geographic features in the area with an inherent claim that goes with it. That's just counter to what all of the nations in the region would expect, believe, and what they need to maintain their prosperity. So the U.S. is a Pacific nation. We've been operating in this theater for over 80 years and longer than that, but certainly in the post-World War II environment. And that international rules-based order has enabled all to prosper, including China. So this attempt to restate what a revisionist history view of claims is just counter to everything that those nations with common values believe. And we will operate here to ensure that that freedom of navigation for all is maintained, and that we will preserve the stability and peace to an order shared prosperity.
That's a helpful answer. I have just one more question from me, and then I want to turn to a member of our audience for a final question. My last question, Admiral, is about North Korea, and I just would ask you briefly for your military assessment as combatant commander about the North Korean threat as you see it today, right now, 2021.
Well, David, as we identified, North Korea is certainly a security challenge in this theater. I just got back from South Korea, where I got to visit my counterpart, and militarily, the U.S.-ROK alliance is strong and ironclad. Our commitment with that treaty ally has been the foundation for peace and stability on the peninsula as we work towards a denuclearized peninsula as the common goal. From the military aspect, the alliance, as well as the strength that we have in the region, enables the U.S. government to do diplomacy from a position of strength. And I think that's what I would view my role as a part of this. So the alliance maintains the stability. It highlights our commitment to our allies and partners, and it enables Secretary Blinken and the administration to take on the actions towards our common goal of a denuclearized and peaceful peninsula.
So let me, for a final question, turn to a member of our audience who I'm told has a question, Andrea Thompson. If Andrea is here and can switch on her camera and mic, please go ahead with your question.
You bet. Thanks, David. And Admiral, thanks so much for carving out time this afternoon and this morning in the Pacific. So as we've talked about, the Indo-Pacific region is so vital to the U.S.'s future. And as you've noted, it's going to take all elements of national power working together with our partners and allies to do that. Can you share your insight on the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, specifically improving our interoperability of our systems? So when we fight and win with our partners and allies, what can we do to evolve those policies to make sure they're getting the equipment they need and to really build towards yours and the Secretary's vision for the integrated deterrence? And thanks so much.
Thank you for the question. I think what I would say is the entire defense budget has to be looked at as we execute interoperability. And as you highlighted, it's incredibly important, right? So the strength of our allies and partners through common values is enhanced by our ability to operate together. And the best way to be interoperable is to operate with U.S. equipment. And that's aside from the fact that it's the finest on the planet. So we are able to come together on short notice with our allies and partners across the region. We are able to communicate, quickly operate at the high end, and that is all based on interoperability. So no matter the funding stream, we continue to advocate for our allies and partners to purchase and utilize U.S. equipment. We see it successful across the region. Just for one example, the P-8 program through the lens of maritime domain awareness and anti-submarine warfare. Many of our allies and partners are flying the P-8, and we can instantaneously come together, share information, share data, and be effective in the region. And that applies throughout, whether it be U.S. Army equipment, whether it be Air Force equipment, Navy equipment, Marine Corps equipment, Coast Guard equipment. It's just the best way to ensure interoperability and make our nations most effective in the military dimension.
So this is David. I just want to apologize for the many members of the audience who asked some excellent questions in the chat stream. We're out of time for this session, and I'll turn it back to Anja, but I want to just thank Admiral Aquilino for being with us, for talking about his command and the issues he faces. Thank you so much, Admiral.
Thank you, David. Look forward to seeing you sometime soon. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Okay, back to Anja.
Hi, it's Nia.